Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Since I'm assuming by now you've all read or seen the announcement that I put up. If you hadn't been, make sure you check that out and find out information about changes to the AP test this spring. Because of the changes to the AP test, now being that it's entirely a DBQ, we need to focus on analyzing sources and talk about the DBQ a little bit more. I know we all should be relatively confident about thesis writing and basic structure of an essay at this point, though we'll hit that again. But we need to work some more on sourcing, looking at a primary source, figuring out what its point of view is, what its audience, its context, that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to do today, and then you'll have an assignment to do basically what I'm going to walk you through here. This PowerPoint is based on the DBQ that was given in 2008. The DBQ for this upcoming AP test, they're actually going back to something very, very similar to how the DBQ was before some changes were made just a few years ago, going back to 5 documents, which is what the DBQ used to be. So these older DBQs are actually a really good practice for what it seems like the test is going to be here coming up. So let's take a look at a couple documents. First of all, this was the question: analyze factors that shaped the modern Olympic movement from 1892 to 2002. Okay. Here's a document. This is part of a magazine interview by the former mayor of Tokyo, who also was chairman of the committee organizing the 1964 Olympic Games, which were held in Japan in Tokyo. An interview that he gave in 1972, so 8 years later. So remember, this guy was mayor of Tokyo at the time when the Olympic Games in Tokyo were held, and he was chairman of the committee organizing these games. Now he's reflecting back on this in an interview 8 years later. And he says, it was a national crusade for Japan to host the Olympic Games. After the Second World War, we were still struggling under defeated enemy syndrome in the eyes of most of the world. Without the magic of the Olympics, we might not have gotten what we needed to rise as a world trade power. I'd hate to think of the situation in Tokyo today if not for the Olympic Games. So, when we're analyzing a source, we can't always know exactly what the source's purpose actually definitely was. But we can talk about what the purpose might have been based on what we know about the source when it was written and all this. He was mayor. He's now talking 8 years later. We don't know from this information whether he's currently still mayor or not. Probably not. Not many people stay mayor that long. So, his purpose. Well, maybe he needs to justify the expense of the Olympic Games. Hosting the Olympics is extremely expensive, and it's always controversial in a country and a city hosting them, whether it's worth the money that they're spending on it. So maybe he needs to justify this to the people of Tokyo, the people of Japan. Why did we need to host the Olympic Games? Well, to help Japan to become a world power. We were still embarrassed. We were defeated in the eyes of the world. Maybe that's what he's saying. Maybe he's taking credit. I mean, if it seems from this, if he was mayor of Tokyo and chairman of the committee, if there's one person who deserves credit or blame, whichever it happens to be, for the games, well, it's probably him. And the way he's talking, he's pretty proud of how it went. So maybe he's just kind of reminding people, hey, I deserve some credit for this. That could be his purpose. Now, what his audience is, I mean, his audience could be Japanese people. His audience could be foreigners. If we knew which magazine this was given to, we would know more. We don't know, so we have to speculate. I'm going to go ahead and guess that his audience is Japanese people, because I'm saying that his purpose seems to be that he is reminding people that he deserves some credit. Well, then, who does he want to give him the credit? Well, the Japanese people. He's a politician. We don't know if he's running for office again or what, but, well, politicians always like to get credit for what they've done if it's good. And so the people they're talking to, well, the populace of the country and the city where they live. That, I'm going to guess, is his audience. His point of view? While he was intimately involved in planning this, he's well aware of all the work that had to go into planning the games. So his point of view is as an expert who now is on the far end. He's past this. This is 8 years later now. He's reflecting back. His point of view is he was the primary force planning these games, and now he's looking back and remembering them and seems to be feeling pretty proud. So that's his point of view. Seems to be anyway, his pride. His context, again, 8 years later. So the context is the context of the text, not the context of the games. The context is 1972, not 1964. We're looking for the context of this document. Now, what's going on in the world in 1972? Well, still the Cold War, right? Still the Cold War between East and West, between capitalism and democracy and communism, right? More capitalism and democracy. Excuse me, more capitalism and communism, not necessarily democracy. Now, where does Japan fit into all this? Well, in 1972, the Cold War is going on, but during the 70s, tensions have kind of ratcheted down a little bit. We've come down from the real height around the Cold War, around the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're not yet to the revived tensions of the 1980s. Vietnam is winding down in 1972. Now, none of that is happening in Japan, but that's all broader world context. Okay, tensions are coming down somewhat. And this gives an opportunity for a country like Japan, which is allied with the United States, but not, not as closely as maybe some European countries are, to rise. And Japan is rising. As he says, Japan is rising as world trade power. Okay? The context is the rise of Japan as a world power once again. But now Japan is world trade power, not a military power the way it was up until World War II. Okay? And he's explaining, he's taking some credit now, not just for the success of the games, but he's linking the games and their success with the rise of Japan as a world trade power. Okay? Now, let's take a look at another document. This is, again, an interview by, in this case, it's an Algerian athlete from the 1992 World Games, Hasiba Boulmerka. I'm going to pronounce that. She was an athlete in the 1992 World Games in Spain, in Barcelona, I believe, where 29% of the athletes are women. Okay? Now, remember, she is Algerian. Algeria is a North African country. It is like 99% Muslim. It's a former colony of Spain. So all these things can be relevant. The more we know about the geography of this country, Algeria, the more we can potentially give as context. Okay? So let's read over this. My victories give me confidence, and they give confidence to my country. I represent my country and all the women in my country who aspire to be athletes. Nothing will deter me from that mission. For every critic denouncing my running in shorts, there are friends and family urging me to continue. I have a tremendous spirit to run and win. A lot of women in my country are capable of becoming athletes, but psychologically they don't think so. They have to become stronger in mind, not just in body. So her purpose here. Well, sometimes talking about purpose, it helps us to talk about audience first. And trying to determine here, is she talking primarily to people within her country of Algeria or foreigners? And I feel like she's talking with people from Algeria. That's who she's talking to, specifically women. Okay. Notice here, she represents my country and specifically the women in Algeria who aspire to be athletes. She's talking to the women who want to be athletes, or even the women who are capable of becoming athletes, but psychologically they don't think so. And notice she talks about critics denouncing her running in shorts. Okay. Algeria is a relatively conservative Muslim majority country where you don't see many women out in shorts. You see a lot of women in headscarves, face coverings, even, okay, dressed very conservatively. And obviously, that's not practical clothing for an athlete to wear, a runner. So she's wearing what we would think of as athletic clothing. And she had critics denouncing her. But apparently, there are people urging her to continue. So her audience, I suspect, is people in her country, her critics, but even more specifically, probably the women in the country. So her purpose in writing then, well, maybe it's to encourage these women or younger girls, right? To act as a role model for them. Now it doesn't say here whether she won a medal in the Olympics. She had some victories, it seems. Whether that's a victory at the Olympics or not, it doesn't really matter. We know that Olympic athletes are widely looked up to as role models, rightly or wrongly. They're symbols of their countries. And she is trying to be a symbol for women in her country and other women in other countries who may have gone through similar discrimination or difficulties the way she appears to have. Her point of view, well, she's a successful athlete. She's looking back 3 years after the Olympics. We don't know if she goes on to compete in 1996, but she is clearly very proud of her accomplishments. Just getting to the Olympics is a great accomplishment, and she has great reason to be proud. So she is proud of herself. She seems to see herself as a potential role model. So all that goes into her point of view. And the context? Well, we talked about how the clothing, the expectations for women in her country are different than what they would be here. And that her to compete as an athlete running in shorts is not expected. All that factors into the context. Now, looking at these two, obviously there's a lot more that we could say about each of them, but since you will have 45 minutes to analyze and write about 5 documents, we can't spend forever on them. So, let's talk here. Do these 2 documents tend to more corroborate each other or contradict each other? This should say corroboration or contradiction. In other words, corroboration, do they agree with each other? Or contradiction, do they disagree with each other? And I mean, they do both. It depends on, well, they corroborate each other in some ways and they contradict each other in other ways. I'm going to talk about how they corroborate each other. I think that if I were going to write this essay, I would focus on the corroboration between these two. And what I mentioned with both of them, the word that's come up with both is pride. The pride that goes with the Olympics. Now, specifically here, we have an athlete talking about how proud she was to be in the Olympics, to compete in the Olympics, to represent her country. And over here, we talk about the pride that this politician has for the success of the Olympics, the pride that it brought to his country. So they're talking about pride in different ways and how it influences them in different ways. And yet, this is still corroboration. The pride that goes along with hosting, competing, just the Olympics in general. It brings great pride to people who were involved in it and to the whole country. Both of them talk about pride for large groups of people, even those who weren't specifically in the Olympics. Okay? Here in Japan, we have the magic of the Olympics leading to Japan rising as a world trade power. And over here, she's talking about women becoming stronger in mind, not just in body. All women in her country. She specifically says that. All the women in my country. So, points of pride. That's the corroboration between these two. Or that's one corroboration between them. All right. Now, you're going to have a very similar assignment to do. It's here on Canvas. You'll do something very similar to what I've just done right here. So check it out. Email me with any questions you have. Have a good one.